From a single image of a deserted rail site, Jasmine Crockett uncovered the largest political money laundering scheme in California history and turned a powerful governor into a federal defendant. No workers, no equipment, just rusted steel and a $1.2 billion contract sent to a mailbox in Texas. 30 subpoenas, 12 fake companies, one offshore campaign account in the Cayman Islands. How did Jasmine Crockett, a black attorney once written off as an outsider, expose a $33 billion criminal network and bring the state's most powerful man to his knees? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The Situation Room was silent, too silent for a building that usually buzzed with controlled chaos. The overhead lights cast a cold, sterile glow on the table, where Jasmine Crockett sat alone, her fingers resting on a sealed manila folder labeled Confidential Urgent Federal Disbursement Report. The room smelled faintly of ink and steel, like truth waiting to be unsealed. When she finally opened the file, her eyes scanned the first page, and her pulse immediately spiked. $33 billion. That was the number staring back at her, allocated to California's high-speed rail project. But underneath, in glaring contrast, another figure. 0 miles of track laid. 10 years. 33 billion. Nothing. Not even the whisper of a foundation, let alone a functioning rail. Her hand gripped the file tighter, knuckles whitening, the tension in her jaw screaming louder than the silence around her. She flipped to the next page. Addresses, dozens of them. Contractors supposedly paid millions. But Jasmine had seen this before. Fraud dressed up in bureaucratic camouflage. As she read further, her eyes sharpened like a blade drawn from its sheath. Empty lots, P.O. boxes, mail forwarding services. No employees, no office buildings. Just ghost companies feeding off federal funds like parasites in tailored suits. Every line item in the report felt like another slap in the face. Not to her ego, but to the American taxpayer. These weren't just accounting errors. They were insults carved into the very concept of public service. Jasmine sat back, breath steady but eyes burning. I want every dollar traced, every lie exposed, every name brought forward, she said, voice low and lethal. In that moment, she didn't sound like an advisor. She sounded like a prosecutor ready to dismantle an empire. The moment Jasmine closed the folder and uttered those cold, deliberate words, I want every dollar traced, every lie exposed, every name brought forward. Washington shifted. The machine began to turn. Within hours, encrypted lines lit up. Files were duplicated and assignments dispatched. But there was one task she entrusted to a single man. Not because he was expendable, but because he had seen war, smelled deceit, and never blinked at the truth. Sean Duffy, Secretary of Transportation, wasn't just a bureaucrat. He was a former Marine turned fixer for the federal government. When systems failed, when projects collapsed under the weight of their own lies, he was the one they sent in, not to rebuild, but to bury the truth with precision. Only this time, he wasn't there to cover it up. He was there to dig it out. 2 days later, his SUV rolled through the dry outskirts of Fresno. The landscape looked scorched, not just by the sun, but by time itself. Officially, this was Site C of the California High-Speed Rail Initiative, a project once hailed as the most ambitious transportation endeavor in the Western Hemisphere. The future of green transit, the symbol of American progress. But what met his eyes was a carcass, a dead promise left to rot under a blistering sky. A twisted metal skeleton sprawled across cracked concrete, forgotten pylons stretching out like the ribs of a fallen titan. Half-built foundations that looked like they'd never been touched since the first concrete pour, if that pour had ever happened at all. Duffy stepped out, his boots sinking into powdery dust. The smell in the air wasn't industrial. It was metallic and stale, the stench of something long abandoned but never buried. He walked slowly across the site, the wind dragging along faded plastic sheeting like ghosts from a better version of this place. Scaffolding leaned like drunk skeletons. Shipping containers marked Equip Zone A sat rusting shut, locked with chains that hadn't been touched in years. Not a single soul in sight. No supervisors, no workers, no engineers, just heat and silence. He reached a bent safety first were sign hanging sideways on a leaning fence, the slogan now a cruel joke. Nearby, rebar twisted like vines clawing their way out of the ground, evidence of a phase that never advanced. A plan that never matured beyond the invoice. And yet $33 billion had disappeared here, into the sun and dirt, into nothing. Then a voice cracked the stillness. "You lost, mister?" Duffy turned. A man stood in the shadow of a rusted steel beam, arms crossed over a dirty reflective vest. His face was lined with sun, sweat, and something deeper, betrayal. His hands were calloused, fingernails blackened by work he no longer did. "Or are you just here to check off another box?" Duffy didn't answer right away. He simply walked toward the man, recording every step with his chest cam. "I'm not here to check boxes," he said flatly. "I'm here for Jasmine Crockett." The man exhaled slowly, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Then you're about 5 years too late. They gutted this place, promised the world, left us with debt and dust." The worker pulled a battered thermos from a nearby concrete block and sat down like a man who'd told this story too many times to care anymore. "They told us we were part of something historic, said we'd be remembered." He gestured out at the decaying site. "Well, here it is, your legacy. You want to know where the money went?" He leaned down and scooped up a handful of dirt, letting it trickle through his fingers. "It's here, mixed with our sweat, our broken backs, and the lies they poured over it like cement." Duffy didn't speak. He simply looked around, recording it all, absorbing the weight. This wasn't mismanagement. It was betrayal weaponized through contracts and hidden behind permits. The man pointed at a half-built bridge span. "That thing," they put up one section, took the photos for the press, then packed up and ghosted. Every damn crew that came after just cleaned, posed, and left. We never laid track, not 1 inch. But the checks, those cleared every time. His voice grew darker. "You know how many families were promised health care with this job? How many people sunk their savings moving here thinking this would be the job that changed their life?" He stood up slowly, eyes sharp now. Instead, they got evicted when the pay stopped. Their kids dropped out of school. Some of the guys started drinking again. One of them, he put a nail gun to his temple last year. His voice cracked. "But yeah, tell Washington thanks for the opportunity." Duffy's breath hitched, just once. He dealt with failing bridges, collapsing contracts, and the rot of bureaucracy before. But this was human wreckage, dressed up in policy language. He looked down at the cracked concrete beneath his feet, then back up at the sunburned man before him. "What's your name, Oni?" he asked. "Does it matter?" The man replied, bitter. "The ones who signed this mess off already forgot mine." Then after a beat, he muttered, "Tell Crockett we remember, and we're watching." Duffy nodded silently, turned on his heel and headed back to the SUV. The encrypted transmission arrived just after midnight. Jasmine Crockett had been waiting, still in her office, the glow of a single desk lamp casting long shadows across stacks of documents and open case files. Her phone buzzed once. Duffy upload complete. She tapped the tablet beside her, and the screen lit up with images that made her jaw clench and her heart hammer in her chest. There it was. Rusted scaffolding, half-built bridges, abandoned machinery, and barren land where $33 billion was supposed to live. A silent testimony to the betrayal buried beneath bureaucracy. The footage Duffy captured played without narration. It didn't need one. Every frame screamed corruption. Every second of silence felt louder than sirens. Jasmine's eyes locked on one photo, a rusted steel beam with a torn safety banner sagging beside it. A monument to decay, built not from stone, but from lies. Her mind raced. This wasn't just fraud. This was a calculated dismantling of public trust, carried out in slow motion and hidden behind the smoke of progress. She zoomed into one of the invoices attached to the images. The company name was familiar, Silent Consulting, but she'd seen it listed 3 years ago in an unrelated campaign finance probe. It didn't have an office then either. Her pulse quickened, not from panic, but from that specific kind of clarity only truth provides. They weren't just stealing. They were laundering money through the very machinery meant to build public infrastructure. They had turned hope into currency and then vanished with it. Jasmine stood up slowly, the wheels already turning. She didn't need to think. She needed to act. With a single swipe, she triggered the secure DOJ line. "This is Crockett," she said, her voice steady as steel. "I want every forensic accountant in the Federal Procurement Fraud Task Force activated now. I want subpoenas ready for all known contractors tied to the California Rail Project. I want a digital trace on every shell company Duffy flagged." There was a pause on the line, then quiet movement. No one questioned her. They knew what it meant when Jasmine gave orders at this hour. "We're opening a full-scale federal investigation," she continued, pacing the room. "And we're not looking for paperwork errors. We're looking for intent." Her final words cut through the line like a scalpel. This wasn't incompetence. This was engineered theft. "We're going to prove it, and we're going to bury them with it." The encrypted transmission arrived just after midnight. Jasmine Crockett had been waiting, still in her office, the glow of a single desk lamp casting long shadows across stacks of documents and open case files. Her phone buzzed once. "Duffy, upload complete." She tapped the tablet beside her, and the screen lit up with images that made her jaw clench and her heart hammer in her chest. There it was. Rusted scaffolding, half-built bridges, abandoned machinery, and barren land where $33 billion was supposed to live. A silent testimony to the betrayal buried beneath bureaucracy. The footage Duffy captured played without narration. It didn't need one. Every frame screamed corruption. Every second of silence felt louder than sirens. Jasmine's eyes locked on one photo, a rusted steel beam with a torn safety banner sagging beside it. A monument to decay, built not from stone, but from lies. Her mind moved fast. This wasn't just simple fraud. It was something far worse. It was a carefully planned attack on public trust, done slowly over years and disguised as progress. She flipped through the invoices attached to the images. Each one was worse than the last. Huge payments to nameless companies, all with vague job descriptions like site prep or logistics. Some companies had no physical address. Others listed only mailboxes or forwarding services. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from a sharp, cold awareness. This was organized theft. They weren't just taking money, they were using the government's own systems to hide it. They took people's hopes, turned them into dollar signs, and disappeared. Jasmine stood up, calm but focused. She didn't need more time. She needed to move. Now with a single swipe, she opened the secure Justice Department line. "This is Crockett," she said, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "Activate every forensic accountant in the Federal Procurement Fraud Task Force. I want subpoenas ready for every contractor connected to the California Rail Project. And I want a full digital trace on every fake company Duffy identified." There was silence for a beat, then movement. No one argued. Everyone understood what it meant when Jasmine gave orders in the middle of the night. "We're launching a full federal investigation," she said, walking the room with purpose. "And we're not looking for small mistakes. We're going after the people who planned this." Her last words were cold, clear, and final. This wasn't bad management. This was a well-designed crime. We're going to prove it and take them down for good. What began as a field report from a dusty graveyard in Fresno quickly turned into a financial manhunt, because once the investigation launched, the numbers started talking. And what they said was terrifying. Jasmine stood frozen, eyes locked on the glowing contract matrix stretching across the screen. Each red line represented a transaction. Each node an alias, a company, a bank account. And all of them led back to one name, not buried, not hidden, prominently placed at the center of it all: Gavin Nome. It wasn't just his signature, it was his pattern. The timing of approvals, the routing of payments, the coordination between shell companies. It all moved like clockwork, like design. She felt a chill crawl down her spine as the pieces clicked together in her mind. He hadn't stumbled into this. He had built it. Not a puppet, not a pawn. The engineer of the theft. The man elected to lead the state had written the blueprint for its betrayal. The injustice hit her hard, not just as an officer of the law, but as someone who had fought her way through every level of a system that now looked rigged from the top down. This wasn't just about missing money. It was about stolen futures, broken trust, Communities that never got the schools, hospitals, or jobs they were promised, because one man had siphoned billions behind a curtain of fake progress. Jasmine clenched her fists, jaw tight. She had faced corruption before, but never one this bold, this deliberate, this shameless. Gavin Nome had turned governance into a ghost operation, and for years no one had stopped him. But that was about to change. She turned to her team, her voice low and sharp. We're not just dealing with fraud. We're dealing with a machine and its creator. Hidden behind layers of polished accounting language and bureaucratic jargon were contracts worth hundreds of millions, sent straight to companies that didn't exist. No licenses, no employees, no operating history, just names on paper and routing numbers tied to empty offices and mailbox stores across multiple states. These weren't failed startups or struggling vendors. They were phantoms built to receive, disappear, and never be questioned. The pattern was undeniable. Massive payouts labeled under vague descriptions like site planning, transport logistics, or material staging. Yet no trucks rolled, no blueprints drawn, no materials ever delivered. Jasmine stood over the shoulder of her lead analyst as he pulled up a summary report. The total so far, over $1.7 billion paid out to shell companies with zero verified activity. The blood drained from her face, but her fury burned hotter. Then came the next blow. One analyst cross-checked contract approvals against executive sign-off logs. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "we've got a match. 5 major contracts, each over $100 million, all signed by the same person." Jasmine moved fast, leaning over the screen. Her breath caught when she saw it. There it was, Gavin Nome's signature, clean and deliberate, stamped on each agreement like a personal seal. These weren't departmental approvals rubber-stamped by middlemen. These were direct authorizations from the governor's office, rushed through in under 48 hours, skipping every oversight mechanism that should have stopped them. Jasmine stared at the name, her jaw locked. This wasn't passive negligence. This was power being used as a weapon. The same man who stood at press conferences promising innovation had been quietly bleeding the system dry. But the worst was yet to come. One company stood out above the rest, Ceylon Consulting. It had received a staggering $1.2 billion in just 4 months. The analysts tried to verify its operations. No office, no staff, no website. The listed address was a mailbox in a strip mall in rural Texas, wedged between a pawn shop and a payday loan storefront. IRS records showed a single tax filing claiming 0 revenue and 0 employees. Yet the payment trail revealed otherwise. Dozens of federal transfers funneled in, then scattered to offshore accounts in less than 72 hours. Jasmine stared at the screen, her hands frozen above the table. Ceylon wasn't just a shell, it was a black hole, built to eat taxpayer money and vanish without a trace. And Gavin Nome's signature had been on every document tied to it. She had seen enough. Gavin Nome wasn't just a man who got too comfortable with power. He had weaponized it, designed a system that operated in shadows while smiling for the cameras. Jasmine had exposed the bones of the scheme: ghost companies, missing funds, offshore accounts. But what she needed now was leverage. Proof that would silence the doubters, shift public opinion, and break the firewall around him. She didn't have to wait long, because Gavin, true to form, couldn't resist the spotlight. Under fire, under pressure, with headlines swirling and questions mounting, he did what ego always does under threat. It stepped into the light. The hastily arranged press conference was meant to seize control of the narrative, but from the moment Gavin stepped up to the podium, control was already gone. He looked sharp, custom navy suit, crisp white shirt, flag pin on the lapel, but his eyes betrayed the calm he was trying to project. He cleared his throat, leaned into the mic, and began with a slow, practiced tone. "Let me make one thing perfectly clear," he said, scanning the room. "These so-called investigations, they are nothing more than political theater, a stunt, a coordinated attack led by people who are threatened by California's success." His smile was thin, almost forced. "There is no scandal. There is no fraud. We've been audited, reviewed, and cleared time and time again." The words rolled off like campaign sound bites, but the reporters weren't buying it. One stepped forward. Governor, is it true that over $1.2 billion was paid to a company with no physical office, no employees, and no project records? Gavin's jaw tightened. His tongue ran across his teeth before he replied. Silan Consulting is one of many vendors used in our fast-track development program, he said. We delegate. We move fast. That's how progress works. Another voice shouted, but that company is registered to a mailbox in Texas. A flicker of hesitation, a flash of something in his eyes, uncertainty, fear, or worse, recognition. He shifted his weight, adjusted his tie, and continued, a bit more clipped. This isn't about facts. This is about politics, about people like Jasmine Crockett, who'd rather chase headlines than build infrastructure. She's not helping the country. She's playing games. Back in D.C., Jasmine stood in the war room, surrounded by her team, eyes locked on the live feed. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. She watched Gavin unravel one sentence at a time. The lighting on his forehead betrayed the sweat his team tried to blot away. His rehearsed calm started to crack. The crowd of reporters was relentless now. Governor, did you personally sign off on those payments? Do you deny your name appears on 5 high-value contracts? Can you explain why there's no oversight record on those disbursements? With each question, his confidence chipped away. And then, it happened. One reporter, calm but surgical, delivered the final cut. Governor, where did the money go? Gavin froze. Just for a second, but it was enough. The corner of his eye twitched. His lips parted. His pupils widened. A single bead of sweat rolled down his cheek. The silence in the room stretched just 1 second too long. And in that second, he told the truth without saying a word. Jasmine grabbed the remote and hit pause. The screen froze on his face, half defensive, half exposed. A mask slipping. The illusion of control shattered. She stepped forward slowly, as if staring down a target. Her voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut through concrete. That's not the face of a man being framed, she said. That's the face of a man who knows we found the bodies. The team around her said nothing. They didn't need to. Everyone felt it. The shift. The power dynamic had changed. Gavin Nome had gone from predator to prey, and he did it to himself. Jasmine turned toward her senior legal officer. I want subpoenas on every individual tied to those contracts, senior staff, intermediaries, corporate officers. And I want warrants drafted for the project's finance records. Every version, every redacted audit, every internal memo. Then she paused, eyes returning to the frozen screen. Make sure they know, she said, voice like cold iron. The press conference was his warning shot. Ours is incoming. This time it's not a microphone. It's federal law. In that moment, the war room exploded into action. Phones lit up. Subpoenas were prepared. Files were unlocked. Jasmine watched Gavin's image on the screen for one last moment. The sweat, the eyes, the lies. She leaned in and whispered under her breath, not for the cameras, not for the public, but for him. You just gave yourself away, Governor. And now, we take everything back. Gavin Nome's face had betrayed him, but it was the subpoenas that broke the dam. Jasmine's voice had barely faded from the war room when the first batch went out. 30 envelopes, sealed and stamped, hand-delivered before sunrise. They didn't go to low-level staffers or distant subcontractors. They went to the heart of the machine, senior transportation officials, financial officers, campaign consultants, appointed heads of state agencies, and political donors with direct ties to billion-dollar rail contracts. No one was untouchable now. Each subpoena landed like a thunderclap, cracking the shield of silence that had protected Nome's empire for over a decade. Jasmine didn't want whispers. She wanted collapses, and within hours they started. By noon, a deputy counsel from the California Department of Infrastructure called DOJ's Secure Line, voice low but urgent. I don't want to go down for this, he said. If I talk, can I stay out of prison? Before the team could even respond, another call came in, this time from a partner at a private firm that had received over $200 million in logistics support payments. His lawyer made the ask bluntly, full cooperation for limited immunity. Jasmine's legal team moved fast. Conditional deals were drawn, interview rooms prepared, statements taken, and what they got was more than confirmation. It was architecture. One whistleblower shared internal memos instructing staff to avoid digital communication. Another revealed off-record meetings held at private residences, where Gavin personally approved massive payments for acceleration purposes. The fraud wasn't sloppy, it was choreographed. And outside the DOJ, the political collapse had begun. Inside Gavin Nome's inner circle, fear turned into abandonment. His chief of staff resigned quietly, slipping out a side door. The campaign finance director, who had once boasted about innovative donor channels, deleted her LinkedIn account and left town. Public relations teams walked away from their contracts. Even his most loyal fundraiser, billionaire tech CEO who'd once hosted Gavin in Napa for a $10,000 a plate dinner, announced that all donations were suspended until further notice. Events vanished from the governor's website. His 2030 Senate ambitions, once an open secret, were now a closed joke. He was bleeding influence, and Jasmine had only just started turning the knife. Jasmine sat in front of the master case board, eyes scanning the now color-coded web. Red for hostile, yellow for cooperative, blue for unknown. And as the red pins turned yellow, she saw what had been hiding in plain sight. This wasn't just a money grab. It was a political pipeline. Public funds had been laundered through shell corporations, then recirculated as donations to Nome-aligned PACs. Infrastructure projects were fake, but the influence they bought, very real. Legislative favors, election endorsements, appointments, it had all been paid for with taxpayer money disguised as development. Jasmine leaned forward, the room silent around her. "This isn't about railroads anymore," she said. "This is about power. This is a coordinated, multi-agency, multi-donor political operation masquerading as public service." Her team stood still, processing the weight of it. "And now that we've broken the silence," she continued, voice low but electric, "we're going to take down every piece of it." The subpoenas were just the beginning. Next came seizures, bank records, digital audits. Jasmine had crossed the line from investigator to counter-operator, and the deeper she pushed, the clearer it became. Nome hadn't just stolen money. He had hijacked the machinery of democracy. This was bigger than California, bigger than high-speed rail. And every day that passed, more insiders flipped, more phones rang, and more emails arrived marked, willing to testify. The breakthroughs had been coming fast, but this one didn't come with a dramatic phone call or a knock at midnight. It came in silence. It was 2:13 a.m. in the DOJ's Cyber Financial Intelligence Division when a junior analyst named Ethan Cole leaned forward, squinting at a blinking terminal. He'd been tracking a maze of offshore transactions for weeks, hundreds of flagged payments routed through impossible webs of shell companies, trusts, and blind accounts. Most dead-ended, some looped back. But this thread, this one was different. The timing, the routing, the amounts. It was too clean, too perfect. Then the final node lit up, a political campaign trust based in the Cayman Islands, masked by multiple cutouts but tied unmistakably to Gavin Nome's re-election committee. Ethan didn't say a word. He stood, walked directly to his supervisor, and handed over the trace log. Within 15 minutes, Jasmine Crockett was in a secure briefing room, staring at a digital map that looked like a spider web strung across the globe. 12 shell companies, all fake. Each one designed to receive large wire transfers, some from federal infrastructure budgets, others from state grants, then dissolve. Gone. No employees, no payroll, no office furniture, no signs of life. Just transactions. Ghost money. Flowing in, flowing out, and finally converging into a single offshore vault. The figure was staggering. $2.4 billion. Not theoretical, not mismanaged, moved, hidden, and now found. Jasmine didn't blink. She read every line. Payment memos like materials prep, phase 2, or environmental mitigation allocation, hiding theft under the language of bureaucracy. But it was the final account, untitled, faceless, but linked to a digital wallet used by Nome's campaign, that made her blood go cold. This wasn't poor oversight. This wasn't even high-level fraud. This was strategic, systemic, and aimed directly at the heart of democracy. He had stolen public funds and transformed them into political capital. The taxpayers thought they were funding trains. In reality, they had funded a war chest, a machine designed not to build, but to consolidate power. She turned to the assembled prosecutors and forensic officers. The room was dead silent, the kind of silence that comes just before a gunshot. "We're done asking questions," Jasmine said, her voice steady, low, and final. "This isn't oversight. It's organized criminal theft of federal funds, laundered through state contracts, and used to illegally fund a political campaign." She walked to the center of the room, clicking through the projected evidence. "Start asset freeze protocols. File foreign cooperation requests with the Caymans. I want that campaign trust locked down before sunrise." Her tone shifted. "Issue arrest warrants for any executive officer tied to these entities. Priority target, Gavin Nome." A prosecutor near the door whispered, "Are we escalating to federal indictment?" Jasmine turned slowly, her expression carved from granite. "We're not escalating," she said. "We're detonating. Gavin Nome didn't just rig a budget, he rigged the state." Chaos followed, controlled chaos. Phones lit up, encryption keys activated. A wall of redacted filings and contract metadata was unlocked and synced to the federal criminal database. Jasmine moved like a commander mid-battle, not needing to shout, every instruction sharp and surgical. Agents began drafting DOJ indictments, even as others contacted the Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network to start freezing accounts. They had him, finally. After months of chasing shadows, buried trails, and legal dead ends, they had the pressure point. Not an opinion, not a theory, a number, a dollar amount, a direct link, a crime that spoke for itself. And in the center of it all, as the government machine roared into motion behind her, Jasmine stood still, one hand on the glowing digital screen where Gavin Nome's name now sat above a figure in red, $2,417,600,000. She stared at it for a long moment, then said, softly but with the force of law behind every syllable, "This isn't an investigation anymore. This is a criminal prosecution, and he's not walking away from this one." At exactly 5:42 a.m., Sacramento's quiet was broken by the low hum of blacked-out Suburbans sweeping down Capitol Avenue in formation. Street cameras were disabled. Local police had been instructed to stand down. This wasn't optics. It was federal execution. The lead SUV rolled to a stop in front of the west wing of the California State Capitol, and before the engine cut, the first team of FBI agents were already on the move. They wore dark jackets stamped in bold yellow, Public Corruption Task Force. There were no warning shots, no polite announcements, only the sound of heavy boots on stone and the thud of palm against glass as they swept past the receptionist and straight toward the governor's executive suite. Inside, the staff barely had time to rise from their desks. One screamed. Another tried to lock a drawer. It was too late. "Search warrant! Step back!" one agent barked, voice crisp and legal. Dozens of agents fanned out, each assigned to a precise location: Gavin Nome's private office, his policy research team, the finance coordinator's server room. Every cabinet was opened. Safes were cracked. Thumb drives were bagged. A shredder still warm from recent use was photographed, seized, and tagged. It didn't matter how ornate the furnishings were, how historic the walls felt. This was no longer the seat of power. It was a crime scene. In Gavin Nome's office, agents opened his polished oak desk to find encrypted hard drives, donor briefing folders marked eyes only, and printed financial summaries with handwritten notes in the governor's distinctive black ink. One agent leaned over and whispered into his comm, "We've got original authorizations. Director, no filters." The team moved methodically, stacking evidence boxes, snapping photos of walls lined with campaign memorabilia, now under federal lock. Out in the hallway, a staffer sat frozen in her chair, tears streaming silently down her face. She had worked here for 8 years. She had believed in this man, and now all around her, everything was falling apart. But the Capitol wasn't the only battlefield. 7 minutes after the Capitol breach, a second convoy of agents hit Nome's campaign headquarters. The office, once bustling with interns and thick with the hum of espresso machines and idealism, was now dead silent, save for the sound of latex gloves snapping and evidence scanners beeping. Agents moved through donor databases, confiscated burner phones, and unplugged every terminal connected to campaign finance. One wall-sized whiteboard read, "Next fundraiser, Bay Area, $10,000 per plate." In a secure DOJ facility 2,700 miles away, Jasmine Crockett stood before a massive wall of screens, each one a live feed from the raids. Her arms were crossed, eyes locked, face stone still. She didn't blink as she watched Nome's empire fold in on itself. She saw agents carry out boxes labeled private contributions, discretionary, saw Nome's executive assistant escorted out in tears, saw campaign volunteers sitting against the wall, heads down, whispering to each other in disbelief. Jasmine leaned slightly forward as the FBI cracked into a locked cabinet and pulled out a folder marked Contingency Plan, Cayman. Her jaw tightened. That was the proof of intent. That was premeditation, the quiet kind of evil, the well-dressed kind. This wasn't theater. It wasn't partisan revenge. This was the law finding its way through the smoke. Jasmine's voice broke the silence like a verdict. "Get the forensic accountants into the field," she said. "I want real-time tracking on every wire transfer in and out of his known networks. If there's still money moving, we choke it." Around her, her team burst into motion. Phones lit up. Cyber teams connected with financial crimes units. Airspace was secured over the Capitol. Every movement was documented. Every asset was targeted. And as the raid reached its second hour, a junior agent found a handwritten note tucked into the drawer beneath Gavin Nome's desk. It wasn't addressed. It simply read, "If you're reading this, it means I waited too long." The press room inside the state capitol had never felt colder. The air was heavy, not from temperature, but from something unspoken. That eerie stillness before a ship finally sinks. Outside, helicopters circled like vultures. Inside, cameras were lined shoulder to shoulder, blinking red like 100 unblinking eyes. Reporters filled every inch of the room, their faces grim, their questions locked and loaded. No one was here for policy. No one was here for spin. They were here for the fall. And then he appeared. Gavin Nome stepped out from behind the curtain, not with the confidence of a sitting governor, but with the mechanical gait of a man carrying the weight of his own undoing. The podium seemed taller than usual, the spotlight harsher. His tailored suit clung to him like armor, but his face told a different story. Ashen, thinner than before, the spark in his eyes now dimmed by weeks of collapse and betrayal. He cleared his throat, adjusted the mic with a hand that barely stopped shaking, and began. "Good evening," he said, tone low and rehearsed. "Today I come before you not as a politician, but as a man who has always placed California first." A pause, a flicker of hesitation. "I have spent the last decade fighting for innovation, infrastructure, and inclusion. We've rebuilt schools, funded clean energy, and modernized transportation. But in recent weeks, a wave of politically motivated accusations has cast a shadow over this administration's work. As such, effective immediately, I am resigning as governor of California." The room didn't erupt. It didn't even move. It froze. For a few seconds, there was no reaction at all, just the quiet exhale of something inevitable. The bomb had dropped, but the shock was still setting in. But Gavin wasn't finished. "I want to be very clear," he continued, voice tightening. "I am innocent. I have done nothing wrong. The narrative being spun by the Department of Justice is not rooted in truth. It is rooted in vengeance. This is a federal overreach, a witch hunt, a coordinated effort to dismantle what we've built simply because we refuse to play by Washington's rules." He tried to hold eye contact with the press, but his gaze faltered, darting just slightly left, then down, then back. His hand brushed nervously against the side of the podium, fingertips tapping wood in a rhythm no one else could hear. "They call this justice," he said, "but what I see is ambition disguised as law. I see people like Jasmine Crockett, weaponizing the system to climb higher while dragging good leaders down." His voice cracked, not from emotion but from pressure, from the slow-motion implosion of a career built on charisma, now being crushed under subpoenas and offshore wire transfers. This resignation is not an admission of guilt, he said. It is an act of sacrifice. I refuse to let California's government be paralyzed by a spectacle. But the spectacle had already begun. A reporter stood. Governor, will you be indicted? Another. Is it true your campaign account in the Cayman Islands received federal funds? A third. How many staffers have flipped on you? Gavin flinched. His lips parted. No words came. He tightened his jaw and leaned back toward the mic. I won't answer to media trials. That's not justice. That's political theater. The room buzzed, not with applause, but with quiet disbelief. There was no standing ovation, no family at his side, no final moment of dignity, only flashing cameras, blurred whispers, and a long walk back behind the curtain where no one waited. He exited not to cheers, but to silence. A legacy crumbling not because of an enemy, but because of truth. And as the door shut behind him, the questions kept echoing. But Gavin Nome would not answer them, because now the law would. While Gavin Nome stepped away from the podium into the shadows of disgrace, halfway across the country, Jasmine Crockett stepped into the light with the full force of the law behind her. The briefing room at the Department of Justice was packed to the walls. Reporters murmured beneath the buzz of overhead lights. Cameras pointed squarely at the black DOJ seal, hanging like a final judgment behind the podium. Then the room fell silent, not by command, but by presence. Jasmine Crockett stepped to the microphone, a folder in one hand, her posture razor straight, her expression carved from stone. She didn't glance at the cameras. She didn't smile. She opened the folder, laid it on the podium, and spoke. Not as a politician, not even as an attorney, but as the voice of a system long denied its teeth. Today, she began, her voice cool and steady, the Department of Justice is unsealing a criminal indictment against former Governor Gavin Nome, as well as multiple co-conspirators tied to the California high-speed rail project. The words landed like hammers, each one louder than the last. The charges include large-scale financial fraud, misappropriation of federal infrastructure funding, and conspiracy to launder billions through domestic and international shell corporations. No one breathed. Flashbulbs popped. Jasmine continued, her tone unwavering. Our evidence shows a coordinated scheme, engineered, approved, and personally authorized by the former governor to siphon public money into private political capital. She paused, not for effect, but because the gravity of what followed required space. Let me be absolutely clear. This was not a clerical error. This was not poor management. This was theft of taxpayer dollars, of public trust, and of democratic integrity. She flipped a page. We have secured digital logs, encrypted communications, financial records, and sworn testimony from multiple cooperating witnesses. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Every transfer, every forged audit, every offshore account, they all lead back to the same office. She didn't need to name him again. The room already knew. This is not about politics. This is about criminal accountability, and the law will be applied with the full force it was written to carry. Reporters erupted with questions. Jasmine didn't flinch. She looked up, met their eyes, and said calmly, "Justice is not a press cycle. It's a process, and today that process has begun." The storm didn't wait for permission. Within hours of Jasmine Crockett's DOJ announcement, the media landscape shifted from coverage to collapse. Networks broke into regular programming with red banners flashing across screens. Breaking DOJ charges former Governor Gavin Nome in $2.4 billion federal fraud scheme. The term spread fast. Railgate. First, it appeared in a single tweet from a political journalist in Sacramento. Then it was repeated on MSNBC. By midday, it was splashed across the front page of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Los Angeles Times in bold black letters. Railgate, a crisis of corruption. In a matter of hours, it became the dominant political headline across the country. But this wasn't just a story. It was an autopsy. And California was the body on the table. Every channel had its own version. CNN aired drone footage of FBI agents seizing evidence boxes marked Governor's Office, Finance. Fox News labeled it a blueprint for criminal governance. Social media was on fire. Hashtags like Joshua Railgate, Joshaka Where is the Money, and Joshua Nome Fall trended globally. Memes surfaced within minutes. Nome's mugshot photoshopped onto fake campaign posters, or signs that once read high-speed future, now edited to say high-speed theft. But underneath the internet humor, there was a deep, unsettling rage taking root. People weren't laughing because it was funny. They were laughing because they felt betrayed, and they were furious. Investigative podcasts launched overnight, combing through old speeches, budget proposals, and donor records. One popular clip showed Gavin Nome, just 3 years earlier, promising that California's high-speed rail will be the gold standard for 21st century infrastructure. Now, that same quote was overlaid with images of rusted rebar and dirt lots, empty construction sites, and signs reading, Future Rail Line, Est, Ison Sibsilnion. The betrayal wasn't abstract. It was visible, tangible, and decades in the making. Civil engineers who had once praised the project now gave interviews describing fake blueprints, missing permits, and sudden funding shifts they were told not to question. Whistleblowers surfaced from all angles. Former interns, state contractors, even city officials who'd raised concerns and been told to let it go. And in the center of it all was Jasmine. She didn't chase the spotlight. She didn't sit for interviews or write op-eds. But her face was everywhere, standing at the podium in the DOJ press room, backlit by the American flag, stating in precise legal terms that power had limits. Talk shows dissected her every word. Editorials called her the new face of federal accountability. Conservative hosts tried to paint her as a partisan figure, until her legal filings were released in full, line by line, with evidence so overwhelming that even skeptics stopped talking and started reading. California's political ecosystem imploded overnight. Lawmakers once seen as untouchable began scrubbing their websites. Several members of the state legislature who had endorsed the rail funding now found themselves under audit. A handful deleted old tweets praising Nome's visionary leadership, while others simply went dark. Governors in other states were forced to respond as constituents demanded transparency on their own infrastructure projects. What began as a California scandal was becoming a national reckoning, and still the name stuck. Railgate. It wasn't just a scandal, it was a symbol of how deeply systems could be corrupted under the illusion of progress. A symbol of what happens when ambition metastasizes into greed. But most of all, it became a turning point. A moment when ordinary Americans stopped trusting the promises of polished men in tailored suits and started asking a new question. Who's really holding the blueprint? As the world digested the scale of Railgate, one final chapter remained unwritten. The sentencing of the man who had started it all. Cameras couldn't follow him into federal court. The headlines could only speculate. But inside that granite-walled chamber, far from microphones and campaign rallies, Gavin Nome would finally have to face what he'd spent years outrunning: accountability. It was the most high-profile sentencing in California's modern history. The courtroom brimmed with a silent storm. Federal agents, journalists, families of whistleblowers, even former staffers who once believed in him, but now sat behind barricades of disbelief. Gavin Nome, the former golden boy of coastal politics, entered wearing a plain gray suit and a federal-issued expression. No tie, no smile, no more illusions of control. His hands were cuffed, ankles chained, the echo of every step a reminder of how far he had fallen. Behind him, 2 federal marshals. In front of him, the judge who had presided over 6 weeks of damning testimony and forensic evidence too intricate and too devastating to deny. The court clerk read the charges aloud, and the list seemed to stretch on forever. Wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, embezzlement, abuse of federal authority, manipulation of campaign finance through offshore trusts. One by one, each charge was answered with a single word from the jury: guilty. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was gravity, like the breath before a landslide. Everyone knew what was coming, but not how it would land. Judge Elena Cross adjusted her glasses, looked directly at Gavin Nome, and began her sentence. Not from a script, but from memory. Mr. Nome, she said, voice measured but laced with iron, you did not simply commit fraud. You orchestrated an ecosystem of theft. You stole from taxpayers. You stole from the poor. You stole from the future under the guise of progress. She leaned forward slightly. You weaponized power with surgical precision and wrapped it in the language of leadership. That makes you not only a criminal, but a coward. She continued, unwavering. You turned hope into currency, and today that currency has expired. A beat. You are hereby sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. You will serve no less than 20 years before being eligible for parole. Murmurs rose, then fell. Furthermore, the court orders the immediate forfeiture of all assets linked to your fraudulent activity, totaling more than $300 million, including international holdings and illicit campaign funds in the Cayman Islands. She paused one last time. You are permanently barred from holding any public office within the United States. Your political career ends here, and it ends not in applause, but in accountability. Gavin didn't speak. His lawyer remained stone-faced. And as the judge's gavel fell with a final crack that echoed like a gunshot, the moment turned from history into consequence. The man who once promised to redefine California's future would now spend his own behind bars, stripped of title, wealth, and legacy. Two marshals stepped forward and tightened the chains around his wrists. He was led through a side door. No press, no farewell, no second chance. Behind him, the courtroom didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They simply watched him vanish, one step at a time, into the system he had once believed couldn't touch him. Jasmine Crockett stood alone in her office. The lights dimmed, the city outside blurred through the rain-slicked windows. The press had gone quiet. The courtroom was empty. Gavin Nome was on his way to a maximum security federal prison in Colorado, but Jasmine wasn't celebrating. There were no champagne corks, no victory speeches, just the echo of silence and the weight of everything it had taken to get here. She stared at the digital caseboard on the wall, now stripped of photos, red string, and names. It was blank, finished, but her mind was not. The cost of truth was never just political, it was personal. She had lost sleep, trust, and friends in the firestorm. She had been threatened, dismissed, accused of grandstanding, and yet she'd stood not for power, but for principle. She walked slowly to her desk and ran her fingers along the edge, remembering every late night, every closed-door briefing, every witness who almost backed out. She thought of the first photo Duffy had sent, those rusted beams in the California sun, surrounded by nothing but dust and silence. That was the moment she knew something was wrong. And this moment was when the lie finally died. Her phone buzzed with reporters, congratulatory texts, political operatives hungry to make her the face of the next fight. She let it ring. She didn't need the spotlight. She didn't need a stage. She looked at the ceiling, exhaled, and whispered not to anyone else, but to herself. We didn't win. We corrected the record. And sometimes that has to be enough. In the aftermath, as the dust settled and the courtroom lights dimmed, America did what it always does after scandal. It searched for comparisons. Pundits debated on cable news, professors drafted op-eds, and historians reached for familiar names like lifelines. Watergate, Enron, and now Railgate. The comparisons were inevitable, but they weren't hollow. Each scandal had its own architecture, but they were all born from the same blueprint: secrecy, power, and a belief that no one was watching. Watergate had its tapes. Enron had its fake balance sheets. Railgate had hollow steel and fake companies propped up by forged contracts and campaign smoke. But what made Railgate different, what made it feel bigger, was the scope. This wasn't just political. It wasn't just financial. It was systemic, and it was personal. In Watergate, the public watched Nixon resign in disgrace after a handful of reporters cracked open a conspiracy that reached the highest office in the land. In Enron, they watched a corporation collapse like a rotted tree, bringing thousands of pensions and lives down with it. But Railgate was something more intimate. It was a betrayal built into sidewalks and broken promises. Californians drove past rusted scaffolding every day, believing progress was coming, that a future was being built beneath the silence. Instead, they were driving past the crime scene. Instead of progress, there was theft. Instead of jobs, there were offshore accounts. And no one, not one agency, not one watchdog, not one voter, was told the truth. And that's why it hit harder, because this wasn't a secret operation behind closed doors. It was a theft performed in daylight, hidden in plain sight, disguised with the language of public good. The money was federal, but the damage was local. Communities promised jobs that never came. Cities left with empty lots. Families paying taxes into a project that had become a political money laundering scheme. Gavin Nome didn't just steal funds. He stole time, years of hope, decades of trust. And that's what made the justice feel not just necessary, but historic. As journalists repeated Jasmine Crockett's final indictment line, this wasn't incompetence, it was engineered theft. The words echoed far beyond one courtroom. They became etched into public memory like, "I am not a crook," or "mark-to-market accounting." The lesson wasn't just legal, it was moral. Every empire built in the shadows eventually stands in the light. And the bigger the lie, the louder the silence before it explodes. So they called it Railgate, and rightly so. A scandal not just of fraud, but of faith lost. And across the country, governors, mayors, and campaign donors watched nervously, realizing Jasmine Crockett hadn't just ended one man's career. She'd redrawn the map of what happens when the truth is buried under concrete. Let me know if you'd like the final epilogue scene. Jasmine walking away from politics, or the public beginning to rebuild trust after the reckoning. In the months after Railgate detonated across the country, while analysts dissected subpoenas and politicians scrambled for cover, one truth refused to fade. Jasmine Crockett had changed the rules, not by shouting, not by trending, but by standing alone against a storm most people couldn't even name and refusing to blink. She had walked into a war zone dressed like a lawyer and walked out with a collapsed empire behind her. And she hadn't done it with the approval of party elders, or with the protection of donors, or even the support of many in her own department. She did it knowing she might lose everything, her job, her credibility, her safety, and did it anyway. She represented a new kind of leadership, forged not in press rooms, but in battlefields of bureaucracy. A generation raised on lies dressed as policy, on systems that told them to wait their turn while the rot got deeper. And she didn't wait. She went straight to the heart of it, stared it down, and tore it apart piece by piece. Not for applause, not for ambition, but because someone had to. Because when no one else moves, someone has to burn the path. Jasmine became that someone, and in doing so, she broke the myth that the system cannot be confronted unless you're willing to be exiled. She confronted it and made it yield. The most powerful thing wasn't that she won, it was how she won. She didn't compromise the facts. She didn't settle for half measures. She stood in front of cameras and courts alike and said exactly what she meant. This isn't just a paper trail, it's a blueprint for betrayal, and it ends today. It wasn't rhetoric, it was declaration, and it echoed beyond California. In state houses, campaign offices, and conference calls from D.C. to Tallahassee, her name became shorthand for danger, for what happens when someone comes along who isn't playing to survive, but to dismantle the lie. She wasn't naive. She knew the machine would keep running, that another Gavin would rise one day, cloaked in a different suit, selling the same promises. But she also knew something had cracked. And once cracked, the system would never be able to tell the same story again. Young staffers started whispering her name in meetings. Law students quoted her opening statement in closing arguments. Activists in forgotten counties pinned her picture next to campaign signs, not because she asked to lead, but because she proved what it looked like when someone actually did. Jasmine Crockett didn't just hold Gavin Nome accountable. She reminded a country grown numb to corruption that the law still matters, and that truth, when spoken clearly and without fear, can still bring kings to their knees. Power doesn't collapse with a bang. It erodes, grain by grain, lie by lie, until the man who built his empire with golden promises finds himself sitting in a concrete box, wondering when exactly the rot began. Gavin Nome used to command attention just by walking into a room. Governors deferred to him, Billionaires returned his calls. He spoke with the cadence of inevitability, a man so sure of his own future that it was hard not to believe him. For years, he sold a story of transformation, innovation, progress. He wasn't just building a high-speed rail network. He was building the future, brick by political brick. Cameras followed, donors poured money in, the people applauded. But behind the curtain, that future was quietly rerouted. Not toward the people, but toward himself. He believed the system would protect him, because he had become the system. He had placed the right people in the right rooms, rewired oversight into ritual, and buried paper trails beneath ceremony. And for a while it worked. The money flowed. The question stopped. Power didn't just shield him, it obeyed him. But the thing about power is this: if it stops serving the people, it starts feeding itself, and eventually it devours the one who wields it. By the time Jasmine Crockett entered the scene, Gavin's machine was running on borrowed time. She didn't come with fireworks or headlines. She came with silence and certainty. While others hesitated, she sharpened facts like blades. She watched. She followed. She listened to the parts of reports no one else read. She wasn't chasing clout. She was chasing the lie, the exact moment when leadership turned into theft. And once she found it, she pulled, and everything unraveled. But this story isn't about Gavin's fall. It's about what that fall reveals. That power, unchecked, isn't freedom. It's a slow-building prison made of privilege and denial. Every time he approved a payment to a shell company, every time he signed off on another donor loop, every time he buried a whistleblower's warning, he wasn't protecting himself. He was building the cell that would one day close around him. The same power he used to crush oversight became the evidence that crushed him. The signatures, the wire transfers, the off-the-books campaign meetings in foreign jurisdictions. The illusion of control was never real. It just took time for the walls to show. In the courtroom, the chains were literal, but the true shackles were years in the making. When the judge read the sentence, 30 years, no parole for the first 20, Nome didn't cry. He didn't speak, but his silence was deafening. Because what do you say when the truth you buried has clawed its way out of the ground and wrapped itself around your legacy? What defense remains when the system you rigged decides it's no longer yours to command? This is where the lie breaks. You see, for men like Gavin, power starts as a tool, then becomes a mirror. It reflects what you want to see: respect, admiration, victory. But the mirror lies. It shows the crown, not the cost. And so they forget. They forget that the people they silence remember. That paper trails don't burn as easily as reputations. That even the loudest applause can't drown out the sound of chains dragging behind every dirty deal. Jasmine knew this. She had no illusions about the system. She didn't believe that one arrest could fix decades of institutional rot. But she believed in truth. Not the kind on campaign posters, the kind you dig out of closed-door meetings and encrypted messages, the kind that doesn't glitter, the kind that bleeds. And in bringing Gavin Nome to justice, she didn't just convict a man. She convicted an idea, the idea that ambition without restraint could masquerade as leadership. That public money could be siphoned into private dreams without consequence. That accountability was a myth that only applied to the powerless. Jasmine shattered that idea with every indictment, every witness protected, every offshore account exposed. She didn't just hold the line, she redrew it. But even then, she wasn't celebrating, because she understood what most people don't, that real justice never feels clean. It feels heavy, complicated, lonely. You don't cheer when the verdict comes down. You breathe. You sit with the weight of everything that had to break before the truth could rise. And still, the lesson remains, etched into headlines, case law, and public memory. When power is used to serve the self instead of the people, it becomes its own cage. We've seen it before. Nixon, Skilling, Blagojevich. Every time the warning was the same. Every time someone thought they were different, smarter, Teflon, they weren't. Because the system may be slow, it may be blind, but it's not deaf. It hears the lie long before the liar is ready to fall. And it waits. The tragedy of men like Gavin Nome is not that they were caught. It's that they believed they never could be. They believed that charisma could cover corruption. that ambition could outrun consequence, that the people would never notice the difference between boldness and theft. They were wrong. Railgate didn't just take down a governor, it rewired the conversation. It reminded America that no title is too high, no office too sacred, no legacy too protected to escape the weight of the law. That silence, when weaponized, always collapses under the pressure of truth. And that the higher you climb using public trust as your ladder, the harder you fall when that trust turns to rage. It will happen again. Someone else will rise. They always do. Another smile, another plan, another promise wrapped in gold. But now there is precedent, there is footage, there is Jasmine, and there is the understanding that if you use power to build walls between yourself and the people, those walls don't protect you, they bury you. Power in its purest form is a contract. It is not given, it is loaned. And like all loans, it comes with terms. Use it to uplift others, and you extend the contract. Abuse it, and the contract cancels itself. Sometimes in headlines, sometimes in courtrooms, sometimes in the quiet humiliation of a man being led down a hallway in handcuffs. So let Railgate be remembered not just as a scandal, but as a parable. Not just about one man's fall, but about how systems bend until someone forces them to snap back into place. About how justice can still walk quietly, wearing no cape, carrying only a folder full of facts and a will that does not break. And let Jasmine Crockett's name serve not as a warning to the next leader, but as a reminder. You do not need to be liked to be right. You do not need power to hold it accountable. You only need courage, clarity, and the willingness to go alone, if that's what it takes. Because when power is used to serve the self, it builds a kingdom of glass, and sooner or later, someone throws the stone. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.